Good morning. Thank you for joining us for Hot Topic Saturday. I'm Kim Knox, Chair of the Program Committee for the League of Women Voters of San Diego. We are using a Zoom webinar for this event, so attendees will not appear on audio or video. If you're having any technical problems, please send me an email at program@lwvsandiego.org. This webinar is being recorded and will be available for viewing on our website tomorrow. Now, I'd like to introduce LWV San Diego President, Lori Thiel.
Thank you, Kim. Welcome, everybody. I'd like to thank you all for joining us here on a Saturday morning. This is going to be a really good program. I'm very excited about it. I want to tell you a little bit about our organization. We're a nonpartisan political organization. We celebrated our 100th anniversary this year, so we've been around doing this work for quite a long time, and we're happy to continue to bring programs like this to you and our attendees. I also want to thank the people who joined today and also donated. We often provide opportunities for people who join our events to just make a donation to the work that we do, and thank you all for providing that funding. One of the reasons we need it is for events like this, and these events, this Hot Topic Saturday event, we host one of these every month, and we also host a, well, we used to call it Lunch with the League, when we all sit together and have lunch together, but now it's just Live with the League. But the same idea, we pull together and talk to each other and bring in experts on issues of a topic of interest to us and our members and our community at large. The next event that we're hosting, our Live with the League, is about income inequality. And we have some excellent speakers who are going to talk to us about how the institutions and the systems in place in this country help create this wealth gap that we've heard so much about, and the detrimental effects that that income inequality and wealth gap have on our society. So I hope you can join us. That is November 18th at 11:30. You can find that information on our website, or you can go to Eventbrite and you can find us there with just a quick search. So with no further ado, I want to quickly introduce the person who's helped pull this together. I want to talk quickly about our league leaders. This particular event is hosted by our internship program, and I'm going to introduce Jenny in just a second, and she's going to get started with it. But before I do, I just want to tell you all a little bit about Jenny. Jenny has created an internship program this year that has been extraordinary. We have had interns in the past, and we have pulled together really interesting opportunities for them and provided them with education and information on our organization and civics and government and politics in general. But Jenny has pulled this program to a whole new level and created an entire agenda that's very impressive. And today's event is a first for us. And she and Kim Knox, who is our program chair, have worked diligently together to create this event. And I'm just really very proud of their work and the work of our interns for today's program. So with that, I'm gonna introduce Jenny Abena, the chair of our internship program, and I'm gonna disappear. So take it away, Jenny.
Awesome. Good morning, everyone. And thank you, Lori, for that very generous introduction. And thank you to all of you for joining us. This is a really special event for me and for our league because it is our first event entirely put together and hosted by two of our interns from our inaugural internship class. And as Lori said, over the years, we've seen a lot of interest from high school and college age youth in interning with us. And we have taken on some of those interns, but any of you that are involved in this kind of work knows that creating and maintaining a meaningful and mutually beneficial internship program takes quite a bit of time and work. But after a lot of discussion and a year of planning, our formal internship program was born. So why spend the time and energy on an internship program? Well, for one, creating a space for young people in the league is really vital to the continuing relevancy of our organization. We need those ideas and those perspectives and the voices of young people at the table, or else we'll be missing out on half of the conversation. And then because the league has something special and important to share with younger generations, we do have 100 years excuse me, of steadfastly defending our democracy by providing reliable and unbiased information so that voters can feel empowered to cast their ballot and then secure in the knowledge that every vote does count. As this election has once again shown us, voting is not a right to be taken for granted, and it must be protected, and the League knows how to do that. So we can and we must support the next generations by continuing to share that information with them. So I think that our program has been, this internship program, it aims to do all of that. And I can say that the first class has been an absolute success. It's really been my honor to work with these 4 interns and to share my knowledge, but also to learn from theirs. And now I have the pleasure of introducing you to 2 of these interns, Radha Singh and Ayushi Chaudhry, both seniors in high school and both inspirations to keep me going through this hectic election cycle. Radha and Ayushi, I really look forward to your event today, but even more so to what the future will bring for both of you. So take it away.
Thank you, Jenny. As Jenny mentioned, Ayushi and I are of 4 interns for the League. With the help of the League, we were able to bring this event to life. We are both passionate advocates for the foster care system as it affects many of our youth in San Diego. And we hope that with this event, all of you are able to walk away with a better understanding of the system and how you can engage with it as a community member. We have 4 wonderful speakers lined up for you today, and I'll be introducing them now. The first panelist is Shlyn Guarian. She has been working with the County of San Diego, Health and Human Services, Child Welfare Services for 20 years. She strives to reduce the overrepresentation of African American families in child welfare by increasing cultural awareness and responsiveness of regional staff, community partners, and service providers. Our second panelist is Vanessa Brunetta. Vanessa Brunetta is a former foster youth of 10 years. She is currently an undergraduate freshman at UCLA, majoring in public affairs. Our last panelist is Omar Passons. He's the Director of Integrative Services of the County of San Diego Health and Human Services Agency. Omar grew up in San Diego County's foster care system and brings a unique perspective to the work of elevating workforce opportunities for young people of varied backgrounds. And thank you. So we will begin the presentation with each of our 3 panelists and the nature of their engagement with the foster care system. We will then end the event with a question and answer segment. Throughout the event, attendees can ask questions by clicking on the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen, and entering a question for the panelists. We will try to get to as many questions as possible during the Q&A portion.
Radha, I think I might have missed getting you the bio for Rosalina. She's here right now. And so do you have that information in front of you?
Yes. We also have another panelist joining us today, Rosalina Burton. She is a former foster youth of 15 years of experience as an advocate for child welfare reform. Ms. Burton has an associate degree in social and behavioral sciences and will graduate with her bachelor degree in human development from UC Davis in spring of 2021. So now we will begin with each of our presentations from our speakers. Shlyn Guarian, could you please take us away?
Yes, thank you so much for having me to be a part of your program today. Once again, my name is Shlyn Guarian, and I'm a senior protective service worker and community outreach liaison with the County of San Diego. And I'm under the leadership of our protective service program managers, Lauren Gabby and Crystal Skirving, and our chief, Jorge De La Toba, and our Child Welfare Services Director, Kim Gerardina. My role is to educate the community about what to expect from child welfare services. And looking at that, it is, as a liaison, is to increase the relationship and communication with our community. I strive to reduce overrepresentation of African American, Latino, and Native Americans in child welfare services by increasing cultural awareness and responsiveness of our regional staff, our community partners, and service providers. Today, I'll be doing an overview of child welfare services. We can go to the next slide. I'll be doing an overview of child welfare services, looking at the County of San Diego Live Well vision, our child welfare services vision, mission, and values, our programs, types of abuse that brings families to the attention of child welfare services, our case flow, and our fiscal year 2019-2020 statistics, disproportionality, our social worker responsibility when they come to, when they're working with the community, also looking at the services that our agency provides, and also different ways that you can be involved with children and youth who are involved in child welfare services. You can go to the next slide. Thank you. The County of San Diego has a vision that every one of its 3.1 million residents live healthy, safe, and thriving. We align with individuals, organizations, and faith-based organizations to accomplish this vision so that our residents can live, productive and self-sufficient lives. The Health and Human Services Child Welfare Services aligns with this vision, mission, through our mission and our values. The County of San Diego has a vision that every one of its children grow up safe and nurtured. When families come to the attention of child welfare services, when we're working with them, we work with them to safely stabilize and preserve families. And when about 80% of the referrals that come to the attention of child welfare services, they do not require further investigation. About 41% of those cases that are open, the children are not removed from their home, and 61% of these are voluntary cases. Those are non-court cases. When we're working with family, allows us to successfully strengthen them and preserve these families. When we're working with these families, we work to safely care for the children and reunify these children to their families of origin. And about 60% of children reunify with their families within 3 years. And if children are not able to successfully reunify with their families, we work with families to safely support the development of permanency and lifelong relationships. About 82% of children removed find permanency, lifelong relationships, either with their family of origin, non-relative extended family members, or with the new family within 3 years. Within child welfare services, we have a practice framework called Safety Enhanced Together. We have six core values. Today, we're going to focus on core value number 4, which is shared responsibility with community partners. But in addition to that, our other core values include relationships with children, youth, and families. We're recognizing that that is the foundation when we're working with the community. Also, collaborative partnership with kinship and resource families, and helping children and youth achieve their full potential and developing these lifelong relationships, as I mentioned earlier. Also, having a strong relationship when we're working with our juvenile court system, law enforcement, and also the district attorney's office when we're working with families. And also, our agency value a diverse workforce culture, and that's characterized by reflection, appreciation of ongoing learning, and cultural humility. Child welfare services, we provide a range of services when we're working with children and families. Of course, we have a diverse workforce, and we strive to have a culturally competent workforce that is family-centered, and it's focused on protecting those children and families that come to the attention of our agency. We investigate reports of suspected child abuse and neglect, and we intervene with families who do not meet the minimum community standards of health and safety. We also administer the Polinsky Children's Center, a short-term temporary detention facility, which is an emergency shelter for children. And then we also administer the San Pasqual Academy that is located in the San Pasqual Valley. It is the first in the nation residential educational campus for adolescent foster youth ages 12 to 17. Some of our programs include, of course, the Child Abuse Hotline, our emergency response units throughout San Diego County that investigates child abuse and neglect. We have our court intervention units that further investigates and bring petitions to juvenile court for further investigation. And also we have our continuing services units that provide ongoing continuing services case management work with families. And we have our residential services and extended foster care that provide services to youth who are in residential treatment facilities, and also extended foster care that provide services to youth age 19 to age 21. And then we have our adoptions and our policy and program support program. So when we're looking at the types of abuse that come to the attention of child welfare services, as mandated by the Penal Code, we have physical abuse, general neglect, severe neglect, sexual abuse, commercial sexual exploitation of children, and emotional abuse. So this is a case walkthrough. So from the point that a family comes to the attention of child welfare services, which is through the hotline representing the red circle that's located there in our case flow chart. The child abuse hotline screens all child abuse calls that come through the child abuse hotline. And that covers all of San Diego County. And it is staffed by our protective service workers who basically takes those calls and then they screen whether or not it meets the Penal Code criteria for in-person investigation or not. If after screening it's decided that it does not meet criteria, it will be closed or screened out, and we refer to it as evaluated out. If it does meet criteria, it will be assigned to investigation to one of our 6 regions in San Diego County, which includes Central Region, South Region, North Central Region, East County, North Inland, and North Coastal. Based on the parent's address is where the referral would be assigned. Once it's assigned to a region, it will remain open for a period of 30 days. And during that time, the social worker will make contact with the mandated reporter who made the report to the child abuse hotline to find out if there's any additional information that the family needs to know or the social worker would need to know prior to making contact with the family. Also, we would make contact with any collateral contacts, including neighbors, extended family members, property managers, additionally, law enforcement or a medical provider or teacher or someone else in the community who knows about the abuse that happened. Also, once that social worker investigates that referral, and at the end of that 30 days, and if it's found that the abuse was unfounded or inconclusive, most likely that referral at that point, it would be closed. If we have a substantiated referral of abuse or neglect, we have a couple of options that can happen. We could possibly, if it is substantiated, we can offer a family voluntary services. And those services are voluntary. The families can opt in or out of those services. And those services are provided in order to help the family ameliorate or address the issues that brought the family to the attention of child welfare services, whether that is parenting or substance abuse or domestic violence, treatment services, anything that we could do to help support that family to address any kind of safety issues so that we can safely close our work with that family. We can offer those services for up to a period of 6 months. Another option, if voluntary services is not an option, if the family is not able to keep the child safely in the home, then our social workers will seek court intervention. That's when we'll file a petition with juvenile court, and a court judge would look at the evidence that we would provide to the court through our petition and they would decide on the surface of things whether or not abuse or neglect occurred and whether court intervention is warranted. At that point, a judge can actually dismiss the petition altogether, or they can decide that on the surface of things, abuse or neglect did occur and that the court would intervene on the agency's behalf for the family to make sure that a child is safe. And they can set out in 21 days a jurisdictional dispositional hearing. And so then that would give a social worker an additional 21 days to get additional information from perhaps an evidentiary exam, from a medical provider, or perhaps get law enforcement reports to help substantiate whether abuse or neglect happened. So at that jurisdictional dispositional hearing, the judge would consider that information. And then at that time, the judge would make a true finding, or the judge can dismiss that petition still at that time. The family has enough time to make sure that the child is safe. The judge would go ahead and dismiss that petition, or the judge would, on the surface of things, or not at that time on the surface of things, but make a true finding, that abuse and neglect did happen and offer either family maintenance services where that child can stay in the home with the family safely with court oversight and provide services to that family for a period of time, or the judge can order that the child is removed from the home. If the child is removed or remain in the home, the social worker will provide continuing services to the family for periods of 6 to 12 to up to 18 plus months of services, depending on what type of services the court orders for that family. Unfortunately, there are cases where a family may not successfully reunify with a family or their child. And in those cases, we're always looking, as I mentioned earlier, to place with a relative or a non-relative extended family member, looking for permanency, lifelong relationships for that young person to be placed in a guardianship situation or adoption or long-term foster care with their family members or in a licensed foster home. Let's go to the next slide. Here's some information here about some statistics that our agency captures on an annual basis. This is from this fiscal year, from July 2019, 2020. These statistics just came out in September of this year. And if you look to the top of the triangle, we call this our triangle chart. And if you look to the top of the triangle, you see that the child abuse hotline receives about close to 40,000 calls to the child abuse hotline. These are concerned community members who contact the child abuse hotline and report allegations of abuse or neglect. Of those, we see that 22, close to 23,000 of these reports were not assigned for investigation. About 423 are assigned for voluntary, and 1,100 new petitions were filed with juvenile court. If you look to the bottom right of that slide, you'll see the various different allegation types that I mentioned a little earlier. Our highest allegation type is general neglect. We have 43%. And then just above there, you see the ethnicity of children in referrals. And I'll go into that a little bit further in our next slide. But to the right, bottom slide, half of the slide, you see that children receiving services as of July 1st, 2020. And these are the different areas where children are within child welfare services. We see that 3,500 children and youth are in open cases. And I won't go into all the details, and we can make this available to you, but we see 358 young adults in extended foster care, 966 children were receiving services in their home. And so we'll go ahead and go to the next slide. So disproportionality is the overrepresentation underrepresentation of children in represented in our system versus their representation in the population as a whole. So here in San Diego County, we have 760,789 children in the population in San Diego County. The green represents children population in San Diego County, and the blue represent children represented in child welfare services. And so earlier I had mentioned that there's a disproportionality of African American, Latino, and Native Americans in child welfare services. So that means that they are double their representation in the population. So we see for African Americans, for example, they're represented in the population at 5%, but in child welfare services at 11%, representing 564 children. And for Native Americans, their representation in the population is 5%, and their representation in our agency is 1%. And for Hispanics, 42% in the population, 45% in child welfare services. Some of the things that we're doing in child welfare services to reduce the disproportionality of these numbers is to educate the community about the fact that disproportionality does exist in our system. We also do mandated reporter trainings in the community in our schools and also in our medical clinics and organizations and different places in the community so that people can be aware of what is abuse and neglect so that they can properly report versus, because there are sometimes when people may skew something of a concern. As you saw, there are lots of concerns, but not everything is abuse and neglect. So we want to properly educate the community about what is abuse and neglect so that they can properly report those concerns to our agency for investigation. Let's go to the next slide. So when we're looking at disproportionality, we're looking at inequity plus disparity, unfair access to resources that might be in the community. We want to make sure that we're looking at cultural practices versus through our lenses of how we were raised individually, because we all have our lenses on what a family looks like. And so we want to look at families having some understanding of their cultural practices so that we can discern whether something is a cultural practice versus child abuse and neglect. We want to look at social economic status as well. That is something that we do. So we want to look at whether something is child abuse and neglect, or is it because of poverty that the family is not perhaps providing food or clothing that might be appropriate from a social worker's lens. For example, looking at religious belief, also sexual orientation and gender identity, tribal enrollment, making sure we're connecting or involving different tribes that a family might be involved in the process of making decisions, looking at concerns or strengths of a family and any kind of next steps on how we can move forward to make sure that a child is safe. Looking at immigration status when we're working with families as well. Let's go to the next slide. When social workers come in contact with the community, we definitely want to be culturally responsive. We want to be aware of our own personal differences and biases when we're working with families. We want to be aware of our differences in values that might arise and that take place. And we want to, in impacting our decisions when we're working with families. We want to consult with our supervisors, our senior protective service team, and our managers when these issues arise so we can process that and make sure that we're making right decisions when we're working with families, and that our own personal biases aren't coming into play when we're making any kind of decisions in regards to families. We want to recognize the importance and understand the value of these differences, and we want to act responsibly as well. And we also want to educate families about what is child abuse and neglect. We recognize that there are people that come from all over the world and that live in San Diego County. And we want to be responsive to all of the different people that come to the attention of our agency, but we also want to educate families about what is child abuse and neglect. And we want to also maintain that sensitivity to family cultural norms when we're working with families. You can go ahead. And so some of the services that we offer through Child Welfare Services, I won't name every single one of them. It's definitely, I want to mention our CFT, which is our child and family team meetings that we have when we're working with families, giving families an opportunity to come together as a team in a meeting setting. And those family team meetings involve the parents, anyone that they would like to invite, including their family members, their non-relative extended family members, their coaches, teachers, sponsors, therapists, pastors, anyone that can be a support to them to help make a decision how a child can be safe. And not just to help make decisions, but identify how they can help, what it is that they can do to help a child stay safe. It might be to take their child to school. It might be to check in on the parents or to provide respite or some other kind of way to be a support to them. We also have gender affirming care. Children that come to the attention of our agency have a right to own their identity, who they are as a person, and to be in a foster home or with a family member who is sensitive to their gender and be supportive of that. Also, with regard to CSEC, we do have a CSEC liaison that works with families or children who are involved in human trafficking. And we work with San Diego Youth Services with their iCare and their care program to provide case management services and support to young people and their families so that they can get out of the life and live productive lives. We also have our extended foster care program. A lot of people aren't aware that young people can stay involved as non-dependent youth under juvenile court supervision from 19 to age 21, because we care about young people and we want to make sure that they are successful. And so we want to make sure that they have a place to stay, that they have access to education, that they have access to job opportunities through our San Diego Workforce Partnership or other opportunities that might be available in the community. So that's just something that has been in place for quite some time, I believe since 2012, 2013. And it recognized that a lot of young people who exited the system early on at 18 perhaps had high rates of crime, access to crime or juvenile delinquency or homelessness or under substance abuse. And so we recognize that, and we're trying to do what is needed to make sure that families or young people continue in care up to age 21 so that they can get the services and support that they need. And so begging the question, what are some ways that you can help? If you're interested in helping foster youth, we have several ways that you can help. One is to become a foster parent. We definitely need more foster parents of diverse backgrounds, people of color. And also we need people to become mentors at all various different ages and backgrounds. And then also, if you're looking for an opportunity to volunteer, we have an opportunity through our Camp Connect San Diego program. This is a great opportunity where sometimes when children come into care in sibling groups, they may not be placed together. And Camp Connect creates opportunities every single month, like going to Disneyland or going to Barnes and Noble for a book signing, or every year we have our annual camp in the mountains where they get a chance to spend about 4 days with their sibling doing lots of different fun activities, and we need lots of volunteers for that. Maybe you want to be an advocate for young people for their physical health, for their mental health, for education, or just to make sure that siblings have sibling visitation. We need you for that. And so if you're wanting to be an advocate, contact Voices for Children to be a court-appointed special advocate to work on behalf of children and be a support to them and their family would be a great help. Or maybe you want to be an adoptive family and create that permanent home for a young person in need. We need that. And so if you're looking for something to do to be involved with a foster child or youth, these are some ways. And you can definitely reach out to me personally, or you can contact the numbers that are on the screen there if you're interested in any of these ways to be involved with the youth. This is just a reminder that it takes all of us to keep children safe in familiar environments, with the children and family being in the center and all of us around them to support them. Thank you.
Thank you, Shlyn. Next up is Vanessa.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for the introduction. I am really excited to be here with you guys today. I plan on sharing a little bit about my experience in the foster care system and an overview of the past 18 years of my life. So I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. I'm not sure if that's possible. Let's see here. I'm not seeing an option to share my screen, but I do have pictures to go alongside the presentation, if that's possible.
I can put your pictures up.
Okay. Perfect. All right, so I will get right into it. So my story begins in 2002 when I was born into a single parent household in San Diego, California. Next slide. I was born into a family that consisted of my mom in the upper right corner, my older brother by 3 years, Christopher, myself, and my older sister, Brittany, by 13 years. At the time, my mom was a single parent raising 3 children on her own. And as an African-American woman, she had very little resources to raise a family of her own. At the time, she received child welfare resources from the county, as well as disability income, having suffered 2 brain aneurysms about 10 years before I was born. As a single mother, she also suffered from depression, having very little moral support, raising 3 children. And at the time, we were in the low income range of San Diego, California, and lived in homeless shelters with family friends, as well as my grandma, my mom's mother, when there was no other resources. As a single mother, like I said, she had very little moral support. And as a result, my brother, my sister, and I had little emotional connection with my mom, having to technically raise ourselves and one another when it came to that emotional connection, as my mom was unable to provide both physical, financial, and emotional support, with a lot of strain on that relationship between the mother and the children. Next slide. Although my mom did have support from her family, my grandma, her mother, was her biggest support from her family. And unfortunately, at the age of 2, my grandmother passed away from a heart condition, leaving my mom completely alone in regards to family connections in raising her children. At the time, my mom was living with my grandma when I was around age 2, and we were experiencing homelessness. And so when my grandmother passed away, this left my mom to fall into a deeper depression, where my sister then found it important to eventually leave the household, leaving my older brother and I with our mom. At the time, my mom was unable to work. She began to lose the resources from the county as well. And so my brother and I were living in a home where there were no longer those financial resources. And so my brother and I experienced a lot of the low income results that came with not being provided the proper food and emotional support as well from my mom and from the community that we were living in as well. Next slide. And so at the time, after my older sister moved out of the house and had a child of her own, my brother, myself, and my mom were living in an apartment around the age 5 after my mom was able to get on her feet. At the time, my mom still didn't have any support from family connections and eventually met an older man that would later become my stepdad, who became my mom's support of like another familial support in our family. And so at the time, my mom was continuing to suffer from her bipolar disorder as well, and her lingering depression period as well. And so although my brother and I were financially stable at this point, and in our cases lived normal lives where we provided food, we got to go to school, and we were little kids, we at the same time did not have the same experiences as other kids in our communities, which eventually brought questioning from the schools that we were going to and the adults in our life as well. Next slide. And so here, my family and I, although my stepdad is not pictured, became a family of 4. And so from ages 5 to 8, from the outset of our home, we were viewed as a stable family. We finally had 2 parents, my brother and I, and we were continuing to go to school, continuing to have that financial support that normalized the 4-parent household. But behind the scenes, my mom continuing to suffer from her mental disorder as well as depression, and not having that emotional connection with my stepdad for a long period of time, began to go through domestic violence periods with my stepdad. My brother and I at the time were completely emotionally dependent on one another. And a lot of times during these periods of domestic violence where my mom and my stepdad would have these periods of violence, my brother and I would lock ourselves in our room. We would be in the neighbor's house, or eventually we would spend the night outside to remove ourselves from the situation. Again, my brother and I saw this as a normal situation, and we normalized our life, therefore never needed to ask for help or brought it up in school. It became our life. And so at the time, my mom completely disconnected from my brother and I, and so eventually it began to impact my brother and I's school environment as well, especially my older brother, who was 11 years old at the time, and it began to have a strain on his emotional and educational progress. And so next slide. While I was in 3rd grade, 8 years old, and my brother was in 5th grade on the right, 11 years old, we were removed from our home and placed into the foster care system. So one day, just to give a little bit of insight on what it's like to be placed into the foster care system, at 8 years old in 3rd grade, I was in my classroom and I hear my name over the intercom in my 3rd grade classroom. I'm brought to the principal's office. I see my brother there as well and 2 social workers, and we are ultimately told that we are no longer able to stay with our mom. And as children, I don't really remember a lot of the conversation. I do remember the confusion and the hurt, feeling as if this choice was my mom's, and that as if we were given up. And so at the time, I was going through a lot of confusion. My brother, on the other hand, was very angry, went through a lot of aggression during that period of being told that we were being placed into the system. And therefore, after we left our school and I was brought to a foster home outside of that school environment, my brother was placed in a group home facility by the name Polinsky, which is sort of like an orphanage facility in San Diego, California. And my brother and I were then officially placed into the foster care system, but placed separately in different homes. And so for the next a year or so, I had very low communication with my older brother as well as my mom. And so although I don't remember a lot from this period, I do remember that I was completely on my own. I no longer had the moral support of my older brother, neither from my mom, even though there was that emotional disconnection at first. The physical disconnection definitely played an impact on my ability to go to school, connect with the foster homes that I was placed in, and to feel as if I were a child anymore, even though I was between the ages 8 and 10 years old. Next slide. And so for the next few years, as you can see here, I think I was around 12 years old. My brother was around 15. I lived in about 5 to 6 different foster homes, and I went to 3 different schools. And my brother lived in about 5 different group homes and remained at the same school. Communication with my mom eventually progressed through the system, where we began to have phone calls, supervised visits, unsupervised visits, but my mom was unfortunately never able to fulfill the parental necessities to get your kids back and to reunify, other than one situation. And so my mom, unable to reunify, definitely disconnected from my brother and I further as we continued to be in the system and progress without her in our life. And although I would say that the system played a part in this, my mom unfortunately did not have the moral support as well from anyone outside of the system to encourage her to reunify with us or show that emotional support through a systematical relationship while we were in the system and she was no longer our guardian, but still our parent. Next slide. And so at a young age, I realized that as a foster youth, I would probably never have that control of my home life in regards to deciding who I lived with or why I lived with them or for a long period of time. And so I realized that the only option that I have to have some sort of control in my life was to dedicate my energy to education. And so fortunately, I can say that this is something that I instilled in myself. Seeing my brother go down a rabbit hole in regards to education, I really wanted to be the person to not only be a role model for my older brother, but for my younger niece and nephew that my biological sister had, who was on the verge of having her kids enter the foster care system. I really embodied the fear that as a foster youth, I wouldn't be able to succeed seeing my brother go down that hole. And so again, I placed a lot of my energy into education and decided to take control of that my life within the classroom, which eventually led me to a new relationship. Next slide. And so as a result of engaging in my education and asking for some sort of advocacy in regards to achieving higher education, going to better schools, remaining in the same schools as a foster youth, you typically have to change schools if your foster home life isn't stable. And so I met with Laura, who is it's kind of hard to explain, so I'll do my best to do that. But it's considered a court-appointed special advocate, a CASA mentor. And she was provided to me at age 11 through a nonprofit organization by the name Voices for Children. And at the time was dedicated to me and my brother as well as a volunteer who would spend time reunifying my brother on visits when we would go on like lunch visits or go out to eat together and do certain activities together. But then when we were in our individual visits, she dedicated a lot of her time to helping me achieve my goals educationally and really striving to make sure that I felt like I had enough support to reach my educational goals, which no doubt had a really big impact on me. Next slide. And so one of the biggest impacts that she has had on me is my enrollment in the private high school that I recently graduated from. And so as I was in middle school and was really looking for that academic challenge to continue my interest in education, after a 6-month process of applications, interviews, and testing, I was admitted into the Bishop School, which is a private school in San Diego, with the help of my CASA, who was on the phone with the courts, with the school. As a foster youth, I'm not provided the same access to paperwork that normal households have to fill out in regards to like financial aid and things like that. And so although it was a very long process, I can definitely acknowledge a lot of I can acknowledge my enrollment into the Bishop School to my CASA and a few social workers as well that I had at the time that had a role in the process. And so for my 4 years of high school, I completely challenged myself academically at the Bishop School. And although there were multiple times where my home life impacted my school life, and I found it hard to balance the two, as the Bishop School is a very rigorous academic school that requires a lot of moral support from your family as a student. A lot of times I did find myself going through depression at the time, wanting to divert my energy to something other than education. But next slide. Fortunately, when I was a sophomore, I was moved into a foster home with two parents from my high school, again, from the Bishop School. And so Jane and Todd, the couple that are technically considered my foster parents, but I like to consider just my guardians, extended family, took me in my sophomore year while I was at the Bishop School, and with a joint relationship between them, my CASA, social workers as well, I was able to fully invest my energy into my own life and take control of the things that I wanted to do and succeed in without having that burden of the foster care system and that label as a foster youth. Next slide. And so just an example of how liberating it felt to have these people in my life who were there for me and who wanted nothing but the best. I was able to, my junior year of high school, study abroad in Italy for 9 months. As a foster youth, I was the first foster youth to study abroad with this program that has existed for the past 40 years. And in the picture, you can see my host family actually, and my foster parents in the blue and the man in the back. And so this experience is something that I really wanted to include because it was the first time where I really took control of my life and not only decided where I lived, but who I lived with and how I wanted that experience to look like. I was able to prepare living with a new family and just really take advantage of the experiences that I was given as a result of dedicating my time to my energy to education, but also just taking advantage of the opportunities that were given to me through the resources that my CASA provided, my foster parents, again, social workers, and just the large community of people that really wanted to see me succeed. And so that was definitely an experience that I will never forget, just because it gave me that power to remove that foster youth label for myself and just become Vanessa, the person who wanted to learn and not be tied down from a system that I didn't choose to be in. Next slide. And so this past year, as I graduated from the Bishop School, I definitely gave thanks to my CASA, again, the nonprofit organization that provided me with my CASA Voices for Children, my older brother who also graduated about 3 years ago, and social workers, my foster parents again, and even my biological family who I still have a strong connection with to this day. And so I definitely wanted to include this slide because I think it's important to destigmatize the stereotype that foster youth don't graduate or have a hard time graduating or succeeding in the educational system. Because I think myself, my brother, and a lot of other foster youth are great examples that with the right amount of support and community of people that we are able to achieve really anything that we put our minds to as other students and other kids our age as well. Next slide. And so this year, as mentioned in my introduction, I am currently an undergraduate student at UCLA and studying public affairs and sociology to one day and hopefully advocate for foster youth, minority communities, and those who don't have a voice around the world, whether they are children or, again, minority communities, domestically, globally. I see myself having some sort of public advocacy position where I can really be that voice for people who aren't given one, but who have the power to choose to use that voice for themselves, because I think that's extremely important, not only within our youth, but within foster youth who age out of the system and weren't provided that opportunity when they were younger. Next slide. I'm almost done, I promise. And so again, I just wanted to include pictures of the really biggest people in my life, my CASA on the right, who again I've known for the past 7 years, who has been there for me, and then my foster parents on the left, Jane and Todd, who have really provided that parental structure in my life, helping me become financially well, mentally well, helping me come to UCLA. And so again, just those really strong connections that I wouldn't be here without if I didn't have them. And so for my last slide, I just wanted to do a full circle and show you guys the little Vanessa, little version of me who didn't think that, 10 years ago when I was put into the foster care system that I would make it out and not be affected by the system that, again, I didn't choose to be in. And so I really appreciate you guys listening to my story. I hope it was evident, like the message I was trying to get across, and yeah, hopefully all of that made sense. But again, thank you guys so much for listening to my story, and I look forward to the Q&A portion later.
Thank you, Vanessa. Next up is Rosalina.
Hello, everyone. Let me share my screen with you. All right, so as you guys already know from my introduction, my name is Rosalina Burton. I first entered foster care when I was 3 years old, and that was due to both my parents being addicted to drugs, which led to domestic violence and neglect of me and my 6 siblings at the time. We entered foster care, and we were first with kinship care placements, and were reunified. Within 2 years, all of us were back at home, and we stayed at home for quite a while. I didn't re-enter foster care until I was 8 years old, and that was for the same reason, because my parents relapsed on drugs, and there was domestic violence and neglect going on. And how they found out was actually because we had really bad lice. And so my dad was like greasing our heads with lice, and we were going to school with like lice dripping down our face, because he had this weird belief that if he could drown the lice out of our heads, because he didn't want to spend the money. At that time, there was 8 of us on 8 children, because we all had lice. So I re-entered foster care, but once again, we were really lucky. There were once again, we were really lucky. There was a church family that we were going to church every Sunday. The church was helping my family stay on their feet, because we throughout my whole time living with my parents, we constantly experienced homelessness. So this church family had helped my family get a house. And so when the church found out that me and my 7 siblings were going to be entering foster care, they all came together and they went to training, foster care training, and a family took either 1 or 2 siblings. So we were really lucky at that time that even though we were split up, we were placed in foster homes, and we saw each other every Sunday. Again, we were reunified. My parents got clean, and we were returned home, but that didn't last long. As you can see, that's a recurrent theme in my life, is that my parents would do what they needed to do to get us back, but drug addiction, poverty, domestic violence, all these things. And I didn't mention my mom was also in foster care. She has no family support on her side. My dad comes from a very abusive, unhealthy family. He has no family support on his side. So now that I'm older, I can see that there was just a reoccurrence of unhealthy coping mechanisms that were happening in my life that were affecting my family, and therefore affecting us 8 kids. And although I believe that my parents loved me in the way that they knew how to love me, they didn't have the resources nor the support to stick to what they needed to do in order to keep us in the home. And so we were once again put back in foster care. At this time, I received my CASA. I heard that there were people going on trips to not to Disneyland, trips to like Legoland, and they were going out to eat and doing all this fun stuff. And I heard that there was something called a CASA, and that's how they were able to do this. So I thought, wow, I want a CASA too. So I applied for a CASA, and lo and behold, I got my CASA Donna. And it was at that time that I was reunified for the last time with my father. It was really because of her in my life that she was able to recognize, because by this time I was 13 years old. I didn't want to go back into foster care, even though I was in a really unhealthy situation. My dad had been evicted. We were living in a rundown house that wasn't supposed to be, no one was supposed to be living in it. I figured uninhabited house. There was no electricity. and there's feces everywhere. It's a really disgusting situation, but I wasn't gonna say that that was happening because I didn't want to go back into foster care. But she recognized this, and so she reported it, and I was then moved over to my mom's custody. And at the time she was homeless, but she was living in a shelter, and I lived with her, but that became an emotionally unhealthy situation, and I was reunified at the age of I was put back into foster care at the age of 15. And at this time, I think it was really because I had someone in my life that showed me that I had worth. I was ready to say, you know, this isn't working for me, and I terminated my parents' rights. I went on to stay at different group homes. I did try a foster home, it didn't work out. And you heard of San Pasqual Academy early on in this presentation, and that's where I ended up at San Pasqual Academy, where I spent the rest of my time from 17 years old to 19. So I was there for 2 years, and I decided just to focus on myself. I was about to emancipate. I needed to save money. And I was really lucky that I, throughout my time in foster care, I was savvy in attending any independent living school skills classes that they had, which they don't have those anymore, which is unfortunate. But back then they had these great independent living services classes that everyone in the county would go to, and they would pay people to go to them. And I learned a lot of great skills about saving money and where to spend my money and how to watch out for like scams and stuff like that. And so by the time I emancipated at 19, I had a nice savings of $6,000, which I credit to this day as being why I have never really struggled with homelessness or financial struggles, because I've had a nice little safety net. So as I mentioned, I emancipated at 19. At that time, there wasn't extended foster care, unfortunately. But I did start to get involved in what's called Voice for Children's Real World Panel. Voice for Children is a San Diego County's CASA program. And through my CASA, I was able to start volunteering and speaking about my experiences in foster care. And it was through that I realized that I really loved advocating for child welfare reform. And I wanted to make a difference because I'd been dealt a really bad hand, and I had a traumatic foster care experience, if I'm being honest. And I didn't want that to be the case for anyone else. And so I started getting involved in child welfare reform, and we were able to pass the bill in San Diego. I'm in California. So it was about 5 years before that. It was a while that extended foster care had been passed for the US, but when bills are passed for the US, they also have to be passed in the local. So we fought to make sure that they were passed in California, and that's where you heard of where we got extended foster care. Unfortunately, I missed that, but I'm so lucky that now all the kids have extended foster care. We also passed extending THP and some family reform stuff that I've done. And so THP is transitional housing program, and that's what I was able to benefit from, is a transitional housing program in San Diego County. And I was in that program from the time I was 19 until I was 26. And I was really lucky because I was right there on the cusp of all these bills being passed to extend that program. Because when I first entered, it was only 2 years, and then they extended it to, oh, if you went to a different program, a home program, which was through low income housing, you could get 2 more years or a year and a half more, and I did that. And then they extended, if you're in school, you can get 2 more years. And I dropped out of school when I was 20 because there was a lot going on in my life. I was emotionally just unhealthy. But when I found out that I could get more housing because I was in school, I decided, well, this is a perfect time to return to school. So it really is great that they have that, because it motivates kids to go back to school, even if they're just going back to school for survival reasons. So I returned to school when I was 23 years old, and I'm happy to say I graduated with my associates in behavioral and health science. I don't know the exact term right now, but I graduated with my associates from Palomar College and applied to transfer to UC Davis. So now I'm attending UC Davis. And in that time, I was also continuing to do a lot of volunteer work. And so you can see in some of these pictures, I'm with other people on the left, and that's me speaking with the Voice for Children panel. On the bottom, I'm with Foster Club. We had pictures. I did this program for how many years? For 6 weeks. And then I was involved in that program for 2 years of just going out to different states. And it was great because I always wanted to travel. So over the years, I've been able to travel to 23 different states. And I was also able to, because of that savings that I talked about, I've been able to travel to 6 different countries, and that's me in India, which no one wanted me to go because there's just so many negative connotations of certain countries that are still developing. Luckily I went and I traveled alone and had a great time. I highly recommend India. It's the best country I've ever been to. I've just been living my life trying to make connections and build relationships with my siblings, because foster care is not the best place for siblings to have strong relationships. There's no one really making sure that siblings are staying connected. And so I've worked really hard over these last 10 years to rebuild relationships with my family and try to have strong relationships with my siblings. Because when you don't have experiences connecting you to your siblings, it makes it really hard to build relationships with anyone as an adult, and especially just because you're blood with them. So I have to try extra hard to have relationships with them. So that's a little bit about what my foster care experience has been like and what I'm doing now. And I also want to mention I'm very happy to say that I published a book last year, and it was called Love Me Anyway, and it's a book of poetry that I wrote. So if you want to learn a little bit more about my experiences and the feelings that I was having while in care and just throughout my life, there's a lot of deep stuff about that. I struggled a lot with depression. I have been diagnosed with bipolar type 2. So that really is like a lot of my emotional feelings about my experiences that I haven't been able, that I don't really share usually verbally, but I've been able to put into my poetry. And I just ask that all of you that are here trying to get educated, I want to thank you for doing that. And those are my call to action. It's get educated, get involved, and stay connected. So first, I just ask that you get educated and understand the population. It's not enough to just want to help. And I wish it was, but it's not, because sometimes that help can be detrimental if you don't understand the population and why you're there and what your purpose is. And unfortunately, in foster care, we do get a lot of individuals who want to help because they feel like a calling for a religious reason, and that's great, but you can't bring that religion to the population. You have to understand that there's a clear line there, and that you have a responsibility to educate yourself so that you can support all members of our community, including LGBTQ members, Black Lives Matter members, and understand terms just like BIPOC, which is Black, Indigenous, and people of color. Just understanding that lingo is important. Secondly, get involved. You can volunteer work, or you can even sponsor. So some people are like, I don't have the time, but there's a foster family out there or someone out there that has the heart to foster or to be involved, but they don't have the time or they don't have the resources, and you can be that sponsor. So I encourage you to mentor, become a CASA foster parent, a social worker, or a sponsor. And lastly, stay connected. Commitment is important. So no, you don't have to get involved long-term, but understand what you're signing up for and what that commitment looks like. And make sure that the youth that you're working with, if you're working with youth, understand what that commitment is as well. So there's something that I highly recommend called the Foster Club Permanency Pack. And what this is a packet in which you sign with a young person, explaining clearly what your role is going to be in their life. Are you going to be someone that they can call in the middle of the night and be like, hey, I'm arrested? Because I've been in that situation. It wasn't my fault, but I did get arrested, and I needed someone to be able to call to bail me out. Or, hey, I'm homeless and I need somewhere to wash my laundry. Are you comfortable with someone coming out to your house washing their laundry? Or are you willing to meet them somewhere to pay for their laundry to be washed? Or maybe you're just like, I can't do any of that, but I can be an ear. Every Saturday, the first Saturday of the month, we're going to meet up and we're going to go to coffee, and I will be here for you. And if anything you want to talk about, I'm here and I'm open. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to post some of these links in the comment section so that you guys can see these links, and I'll label them, and you can go and check those out for yourself. So thank you so much for coming and being willing to learn and listening to my story. And I hope that you got something out of my presentation.
Thank you so much, Rosalina. It was really wonderful. Last panelist, Omar.
right, so just a quick time check. You trying to do about 15 minutes of Q&A, or just want to make sure before I get started?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, so I'll moderate it accordingly. Good morning. So my name's Omar Passons. There's a lot. I've done a handful of panels with other people who have been in the foster care system, and it's always I feel like I learn about myself in these panels and the way that the sort of emotional response to what other people share. What I'm going to do over the next 10 minutes is talk a little bit about my experience, a little bit about where I am in the world now, and what I think that you as a room full or virtual room full of advocates can do to really make a difference. But first, I want to say this. About maybe a couple months ago, I started seeing a therapist. And I share this because Black and Latino people in this country, in San Diego, everywhere else, are less likely to go to seek professional support for behavioral health issues than others, and it's a big deal. So not only are we disproportionately affected, and when you go through the foster care world, not everybody. This is not a uniform statement, but the path can be bumpy. I'll say that. And so to have an opportunity, even at this stage, at 45, with a good life, to have an opportunity to get that kind of behavioral health support just to work through some things is important. And so I made a choice to say that a little bit more publicly. And I hope that, and I'll put a link in the chat with some information, I hope that those of you who are either are African American yourself and watching this, or work with people or have colleagues, can open the door to be more earnest and just like sort of forthright about this. Nobody would think twice about going to the doctor if there's something wrong with their elbow, right? So, or your knee or something. So I just wanted to start there. Now, so I was 10 months old when I went into the foster care system. I have 3 brothers and sisters, none of whom I grew up with. All of our journeys are not the same, obviously. And I think that's an important thing to be mindful of as you are on a journey to understand what child welfare is all about in San Diego County and what the supports and things are. So I went in, as I said, 45. So that was in the mid 1970s. But to really understand what happened, we got to go back to 1940. My grandmother, Henrietta, made what is today 75% below the median income for a woman in Little Rock, Arkansas. Very poor. In 1940, cleaning house, which is the only thing that she could do. It was the only thing her mother could do. And her mother was born a slave. So she had my mother and 9 other children. And that poverty kept my mother from getting health care. And so she wound up with a disability as an infant. And she had mental illness and ended up on her own by her teenage years, drifting from city to city to city. And so my biological siblings were born elsewhere. I was born in San Diego. And I think Shlyn put up that statistic about how many kids enter the foster care system through neglect. And that's the situation that I was in. So I find myself with a mother who, because of poverty, could not get the help she needed to deal with her physical ailments and mental health issues. And so then I'm in a foster home. And I was going to put up a slide with 5 of my more than 100 foster brothers and sisters, but I'm not going to do that. I thought about it, but 4 of the 5 in the photo I was going to put up are deceased, and so I just, by virtue of disease and physical ailments that they suffered, that brought them into foster care. But what I want to say about that experience is going through, one of the panelists mentioned her brother being in a group home. When you are in a home with 6 children at a time, all of you either having parents who didn't want you, couldn't care for you, were physically or emotionally abusive. Right? It's not the greatest environment, no matter the best case of circumstances, right? And so I think that the thing that I want to say about that, for those of you, for the advocates that are watching this presentation, is to try to understand young people in a different way. Try to help your own children understand young people in a different way. I mean, there's no way that my friends when I was in first or second grade had any reason to know that I would come to school with a hair that was a mess, or in sort of hand-me-down clothes that weren't quite right, that all these things were happening because of the circumstance that I was coming from. And so kids are notoriously not compassionate, but we as adults have an opportunity to help make sure and foster and deepen that compassion in our young people. I think as you sort of pivot to thinking about, well, what can we do? What can I, as a League of Women Voters member, participant, active, civically engaged person, do? The data is not really good. So I am the director of the Division of Integrative Services in the County of San Diego's Health and Human Services Agency. That's a mouthful, but my job is to try to work across departments to better support that Live Well San Diego vision that Shlyn mentioned when she talked about, that every single person in our region be healthy, safe, and thrive in their communities. And I think one of the challenges that we have is you hear people say, well, a lot of foster children end up homeless, or a lot of foster children end up X or Y. But we don't have people pushing to distinguish between, were they in San Diego County's foster care system? Were they in Orange County or New Jersey or Texas? And that matters, right? It matters because you're trying to get a system to work as well as it can. And we need to understand what's actually going on. We also don't get great data about people's experience in the child welfare system coming out of incarceration, coming out of probation, coming out of mental health facilities, coming out of other types of care facilities, hospitals, et cetera. And so I think one of the things that as a system we can do better is really push to understand what's happening to people who go into care in San Diego County within our child welfare system, what's happening as they leave and transition. I benefited from a sort of like a port in the storm, I would say, right? A couple of parents who, neither of whom had graduated from high school. These are my foster parents who adopted me. Neither of whom graduated high school. So there were no trips, no fancy anything growing up, but they were solid. And I think probably if you ask most former foster youth, I think the two things you probably hear is, one, it would be really great to have some like fixture, some adult that I know I can trust. And two, and this just seems to play itself out over and over again, is there's a degree of resilience that seems to be baked into every or like the vast majority of foster youth that I come to meet, both when I think about my foster brothers and sisters and the couple who I'm still in touch with now, and then the 3 or 4 panelists that I've been on. And so I think helping other youngsters develop that same resilience is really, really important. A couple of other key advocacy points or things that you as members can really do, it happen at the state and federal level. So I know that some of you have relationships with Congress, men and women, and with senators and state legislators. That's where a lot of the resources come from. And getting housing with fewer strings attached is wildly important. If the point is that we want young people to have a safe environment when they age out of the system, right, to be able to take care of themselves and move forward, right, putting strings that don't exist for everybody else in society on a subset that has already dealt with a lot is a real problem. And so there's an area. This is Runaway and Homeless Youth Awareness Month, and a lot of the kids who end up on our streets, right, are teetering between our child welfare system and not. Maybe there's no verified case of neglect or abuse. And sometimes, it varies. But the point is, like, advocating at the federal level to address poverty issues, advocating at the state level to address direct economic support, right, in the communities that need it most. Those are ways that you can really make a difference. And so I would say to you, I was glad and thankful to join this panel so I could share both a little bit about the story that brought me to this place, to be able to try to help and make a difference in the county of San Diego, and also to share some specific calls that you can engage in. And I'll just end by reiterating, so there's 10 minutes for the Q&A, that calling for quality data that really helps us understand who's in care, who's exiting care, what's happening with young people when they're out of care, where are they from? These types of things really, really matter. And so I hope that you'll go forward after this presentation and take to heart your ability. Not everyone has an opportunity to necessarily volunteer or be a mentor or even take kids into their home. But to the extent you have relationships, connections, pick up the phone, get on the horn, let people know that these are issues that are important. So thank you very much for the time to speak today, and I'll defer back to Ayushi and Radha for questions.
Thank you to each of our panelists for sharing their personal experiences and engagement with the system. Let's move on to our attendee questions. As a reminder, please click the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen and type out your questions, and we will be answering them. While we are getting those questions in, I'd like to start out by asking our panelists about a topic that several people mentioned while we were putting this event together. The public often hears stories of foster youth being shuffled in and out of homes multiple times. How common is this situation, and what is one way to increase the stability of these homes?
You're on mute, Shlyn.
Thank you. I know within Child Welfare Services, we advocate very strongly that, that children stay in one home. Like, for example, I have I'm a case carrying social worker, and I have a baby that's placed in a home, and we always have to work on concurrent planning. And where at the same time that I'm working towards reunification with a parent, I need to find a permanent home just in case a parent fails to reunify, and someone who's willing to take care of that child long term. And at the same time, I'm looking for relatives and other people who can take care of this child because the parent is not doing what they need to do. And the caregiver, even though she's not a concurrent provider, because I was able to locate a relative and going through the process of them being cleared, she always tells me, even though I'm not a concurrent home, I want you to keep the baby here so that the child can have a stable place to stay and not be moved from one place to another. The baby can stay here as long as the baby needs to, until they can get to their forever home. So that's always the goal, is for children to stay in one place. But we do recognize that people have various different reasons why children need to move from one home to the next. People have good intentions. I had another family member, a non-relative extended family member, who took the care of a child. And prior to really processing with that caregiver, the responsibility, the commitment level that is required to take on the care of this kid, if they're looking at, just in case the family member doesn't reunify, are they willing to keep that child until they become an adult? Because we're wanting to keep these kids in one home, not moving from one placement to another placement. So the social worker's responsibility is to assess that relative, that non-relative extended family member, or that concurrent caregiver who might take care of that kid if they're not able to be with their birth mother or father, their level of commitment, because the goal, the objective when that social worker is making that decision for that child to be placed in a home is that they would stay in that one home. But there are times, for various different reasons, people who take on the care of kids, they start out being committed, but then something happens in their life. They might have a disruption. Like, I had a family member where their relative passed away. And so that's an extreme situation. but the kids, you know, had to move to another relative, and then finding another relative, that's another issue. You know, those people have various different reasons. People can be a guardian for many years, and then for some reason decide they can no longer be a guardian. And then they decide to give up that guardianship. And so then we have to find another placement for that kid. And so our goal always is that kids would be in one placement until they can successfully reunify with their parents. But things happen, and sometimes they do need to move to multiple homes, unfortunately.
The one thing I would just chime in briefly and say is I had a whole lot of foster brothers and sisters who ran away. Who like they were my brother and sister for like a day or a week or a month, and they would run away, or like, you know, there's a lot going on. So I just, you know, there's a lot of reasons that ends up happening. Not everybody might, you know. So I just wanted to mention that. I know you got a lot of questions, so I'll go back on mute.
Thank you.
I just wanted to quickly say that I also think what hasn't been mentioned is that we have a lot of great foster homes, and the problem with that is that the great foster homes usually retain their foster children, and then you have kids that are rotated around in foster homes that aren't that great, and we don't have accountability to the extent in which I think there should be, and where multiple kids are saying a foster home is not a good foster home and it's remaining open because we have the need. And so I think that's another reason why on average really kids aren't experiencing that many foster homes. On average, I think a foster youth is only having 3 placements, but for someone like me, I experienced 23 placements. That was because I was reunified a lot, and then just going into foster homes that then I would find out a kid was in that foster home too, and they said it was a poor foster home, and I'm like, then why did I have to go through that too? So it's just, you know, there's multiple reasons, like they said, but I just wanted to put that out there, that is one of them. I think is that kids are being rotated in foster homes that may not be that good. So there's a small section of youth who are getting not the best foster placements, and then most of them though are getting great homes.
Thank you guys for answering that question. The next one that we have from an attendee is, are there any difficulties with undocumented families caring for a child in the system? For example, are they afraid to go to court? Shlyn, I believe you're on mute again.
Yes, there may be some difficulties, you know, with regard to that, because they may think that they may be brought into custody for various different reasons, because, you know, the courthouses are staffed with sheriffs who are at the front doors and who are also in the courtrooms. So it may be a legitimate fear for families to go to court. So that may create a difficulty. That may create a difficulty for children who come into care who are binational, and their relatives live, you know, in a different country. They may not want to take care of the kids because they're undocumented, and so that does pose a problem or barrier for placement, and it also causes a barrier for families that may not want to go to court.
Thank you, Shlyn, for that answer. Unfortunately, we are running short on time. So
is there one question that I can answer? Someone had asked a question earlier today about, is there adequate staff to perform all of the responsibilities in working with our families? They had asked that earlier on today. And I just wanted to share that within Child Welfare Services, we have approximately 1,500 staff, and 800 of those are direct practice social workers that work with families. We could definitely use more social workers. The caseload is typically about 20 to 25. And so, you know, there's lots and lots of work to be done with working with these families, because, you know, just with one family, like for example, I had a caseload of a 4-sibling set, and 2 siblings were placed in there were 4 siblings, 2 children were placed in one home and 2 children were placed in another home. And as one social worker, if I have 15 to 20 other kids, it is a lot, you know, for those kids alone. I love those little kids. and I would pick them up once a week and make sure that they have a sibling visit, and then also transport them so that they can have visitation with their parents, in addition to making sure that I'm providing for all of their services that they have, whether that's early childhood education, other developmental services, or physical, dental exams, things of that nature. And if they have multiple fathers that are involved, then I have to make sure that I'm engaging each one of those fathers and also providing that visitation. And in this particular family, the mother was incarcerated. So I had to make sure that they had the contact with their parent during a pandemic. And thankfully, we were able to do Zoom calls like this so that the kids could see their parent in jail. And so it is a lot of work for social workers, but social workers get into this work because they love working with families, just like myself, and when I'm in a community like this, I like to tell people about San Diego State University. They have a Title IV-E program. And that program is a federally funded program for anybody who's interested in becoming a social worker. In exchange for your education, paying for your education, you get a stipend for either a bachelor's or a master's degree. And in exchange, you can work for any public child welfare agency in the state of California for 2 years. And so I took advantage of that program, and I was able to I started out in the pilot program at San Diego State University bachelor's program, and then also took advantage of the graduate program, and in exchange, worked for child welfare services for now 20 years. And so it's a great opportunity, and lots of social workers come through that program, and we need lots of people of color to also take advantage of that program so that our staff can match, our workforce can match the communities that we serve.
Thank you. So we will be ending the panel shortly. So I just wanted to remind everyone of the ways that you can support families and children here in San Diego. Can we have the final slide of the action items, please? Thank you. So as with all league events, we want our attendees to walk away with the ideas for how to take action on what we discussed. You can see several resources on the slide we have up now. This information will also be sent to you in a follow-up email to all of our attendees. A recorded version of this event will be also available in the League's YouTube channel, so please share with all your networks. I want to thank all of our panelists who presented today. It was so much fun and exciting to hear your personal insights. Thank you to all our guests who attended today's event. It has been a pleasure to host this event alongside RADA today. Thank you, and most importantly, thank you to the League of Women Voters who have allowed RADA and I to explore this field of interest, and for all the support you have given us in creating this event. We could not have done it without you. Thank you, everyone, and have a good rest of your day.